Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's meetup. Today, we are looking at the anatomy of great customer engagement, a framework for designing interactions that create value across the customer lifecycle. That is quite a mouthful, so we do have quite a bit to unpack today. Before I dive into the presentation, I do just want to say that the session is being recorded and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. If you have any questions or comments, please can you save them towards the end of the session. We'll leave about 15 to 10 minutes for discussion and questions or anything like that. If you would prefer, you can ask them in the chat or the Q&A. Or if you would like to be made a contributor, please raise your hand and then you can ask your question through video instead of chat. So thank you so much. I think I'll get started and jump straight into it. So the aim of today's discussion is essentially to dissect all the moving parts that go into the perfect interaction. And the reason for this presentation or this conversation or topic is because I recently only came to learn that there's a difference between recommender, offer, and a nudge. And when we talk about customer interaction, I sometimes use it interchangeably with customer engagement. But in reality, they are actually all very things, and they all sit within different spaces of what makes the perfect customer interaction. So the aim of today is essentially to give that kind of clarity and that deep dive into all the moving parts. So to begin, I want to look at what exactly is the difference between these three terms here: customer engagement, customer experience, customer interaction. I do want to make the important note here that I say customer, I'm referring to just a general individual that interacts or engages with a business. And the reason I'm saying that is because as we get closer to the middle of the presentation where we look at the customer lifecycle, there's a period in the lifecycle where you aren't necessarily a customer yet. You are considered a lead or a prospect or something like that. And for those purposes, I just using the term customer to refer to any individual. It can refer to someone who isn't a paying customer yet. But to start off with, what exactly is the customer experience? This is essentially the kind of cumulative, emotional, but also rational perception that a customer develops based on every interaction with a business or a brand. And it starts at that initial discovery. So when you aren't necessarily yet a customer, right through to that post-purchase support where you are sitting in that loyal customer space. And most importantly, it spans all aspects of the business or the brand. So we'll look at things like marketing touch points. So what billboards does the customer see? What ads do they see? If they attend sponsored events, what are these events? That all fits under customer experience. But it also helps, the customer experience also includes things like the actual product itself that you purchase or the service. A great example, I think it was one of the first ones I ever learned about in high school about great customer experience, is when you buy an iPhone or an Apple product, the packaging itself is an experience. And the store layout, all of that, all falls into customer experience. It also includes things like your different channels. So I've mentioned the store layout itself, but also online branches or apps, digital channels. So these all essentially inform how a customer experiences a business or a brand, and that emotional and rational perception. A customer experience, I don't know, a certain customer experience that I've particularly noticed at the moment, I don't know if it is part of their strategy, but it happens often enough that I think it is Virgin Active. Anytime you walk into one of their gyms and you scan your card to go in, they make it a habit to greet you, the staff there make it a habit to greet you by first name. And they say, welcome Madison, or hello Madison, have a good day. And I think that's just one aspect that forms part of that in-person customer experience. But then they also have an app that you can book classes. So that's a completely different aspect of their digital customer experience. We then have customer engagement. This is obviously a little bit different to customer experience because this looks at that ongoing two-way interaction between the business and its customers through various stages of the customer lifecycle. And customer engagement essentially goes beyond that single transactional interaction, and it looks at all these interactions and how they build a meaningful long-term relationship. It specifically focuses on how engaged or how active the customer is with the business or that brand through a series of interactions. So this now brings me to a customer interaction. And what is this exactly? This is the exchange or touch point between the business and customer or prospective customers. And it encompasses all these different moments of interactions across the life cycle and across different channels. And essentially, these single interactions form the building blocks of good customer engagement. I said, customer engagement is about that two-way exchange, and a good interaction it forms part of that two-way exchange. So if we look at this one here, we can see a business puts out an interaction, wrong way. The customer responds positively to that interaction. It's very important that they respond positively. You don't want any negative customer interactions. And through this singular two-way interaction, the customer is then engaged. So essentially this building block, single interaction, helps engage a customer, which then feeds into the overall customer experience. And again, it can happen across channels, whether digital or in person. Now, this is essentially the ideal image of what customer interactions should look like. It is the series of ongoing exchanges between a business and a customer. It's two-way, so you can see here the dotted lines are the business interacting with the customer, and then the solid lines are the customer interacting with the business. So again, that two-way exchange. Now, a lot of businesses think that this is what their customer interactions look like, and hence their customer engagement. But unfortunately, for a lot of businesses, this isn't always the case, because here, as we can see, it's one customer and one business, a combination of multiple departments within an enterprise. So for example, if we look here, we have the big group, let's say it's a bank, and within that bank, there are different departments. You can have the department that's responsible for lead generation and engaging or interacting with prospective customers. You have a department that's responsible for the retention and the loyalty of long-term customers. You also have different product and service departments. So you can have a credit card division, you can have a savings account division, or maybe the mortgage division. And what happens here when you have a business that's obviously divided into all these departments, they are responsible for their own profit and loss, and they want to achieve their own goals. And because of that, they are essentially all trying to interact with said customer, and they are all trying to achieve some sort of value from a customer interaction or an engaged customer. And because of that, what we often find is that interactions tend to look a little bit like this, where instead of that kind of singular ongoing relationship between the customer and the single business, it's these scattered or fragmented interactions that are being kind of shot out from all different departments. In this example, some of them are good. We can see here maybe this department, let's say it's the credit card department, maybe if it's a telco, it's the data department who's recommending data bundles to a customer. They are good and the customer responds positively to them, but sometimes they're bad and the customer simply ignores them or maybe grows kind of irritated and fatigued by these interactions. In other cases, it isn't necessarily the customer being bombarded by interactions or by bad interactions. Sometimes there's very few interactions. The example that I can think of here is, I think it was Jay, who had a credit card with the bank and he fell dormant and stopped using it. And they never attempted to encourage him to use it again or interact and engage with him in any way. So this is another instance of where we can see kind of failed or poor customer interactions that then essentially lead to poor customer engagement. So when you have a series of all these red lines or one or two red lines, you then aren't properly engaged with your customer because it isn't that two-way interaction and it's fragmented and is not particularly effective. So now the question is, if this is the ideal stage of customer interactions and a business wants to be continuously interacting in this two-way relationship with their customer to then engage them effectively, how exactly do they do that? And that is what we are going to be unpacking today. So for this kind of overview of all the moving parts that go into the perfect interaction, we're assessing a single interaction. So the single dotted line that leads to this customer interacting and then being engaged. And this process starts with two pillars, your strategy and your application. Strategy defines the plan, it's essentially the plan for how exactly the business wants to interact with a customer at a specific stage in the life cycle. So it sets, where is the customer in the life cycle, what's the business goal or the desired value, and then the intended outcome of the interaction. And what this strategic direction does is that it ensures every interaction drives some form of meaningful engagement and supports the business's objectives. We then have application. This is the execution of that strategy. And this then determines what goes into the interaction. So we'll look at things like the touch point, the channel, the timing, and the tone. And what you want from the application of the strategy is then to deliver an interaction that resonates with the customer, and it hopefully maximizes value for both the customer and the business. So these are the two pillars we're going to be looking at. So to start with strategy, let me change slides. There we go. Your strategy always begins with a customer sitting somewhere on the life cycle. The customer life cycle is essentially where a customer is in terms of their relationship to the business or to a specific product or a service. And the reason I say I want to make a note here is because you can be a long-term customer with, for example, a bank, a telco, a service provider of any sort. You can be a long-term customer, so you sit within this retention stage. But in terms of your relationship to a new product, I've mentioned credit cards, I'll mention it again. You can be with your bank for 10 years and have a savings account and a current account, but you may not have a credit card. In that regard, you sit within the discovering or engage stage. You are considered a new to credit card department, even though you are not considered new to bank. The customer sits in terms of their relationship stage. We have 4 different stages. So we've got discovery, which is essentially you aren't a customer yet. For the business, you are maybe a lead. They want to make you aware of their business. They want to get you interested. They then want to kind of convert you into an interested party. We could say a lead or a prospect. I'm sure every business has their own name for how they categorize these individuals. And within this engage stage, the person has shown interest. And now from there, you want to start engaging them to get them to sign up or complete a purchase, buy something, open an account in the case of a bank, or maybe buy a SIM card, buy a device in the case of a telco. The aim is to then convert them into a customer. Once you've converted them into a customer and they sit within this activate stage, you then want to get them using whatever it is that they've just bought or signed up for. You want to help them realize the value of the purchase they've just made. So if it's opened up a bank account or bought a credit card, signed up for a credit card, you want them to start using it. Then we sit in this retention stage, which is where you are a long-term customer and now they want to kind of, I don't want to say achieve the most profit out of you, but they want to start making you a valuable customer and focusing on loyalty, and they obviously don't want you to leave. So that's where you sit within the retention space. Then a layer below that, we have something I would like to call the kind of customer value or value, which is essentially the strategic layer that decides what exactly the business wants to do with the customer, what they want from them, or what they want to do for them. And what kind of value do they want to get out of this customer who's sitting somewhere in this life cycle? So, for example, each specific stage, there's a kind of different type of value associated with the stage. So if we look at something like the discovery stage, it's valuable to have people aware and interested in what your business does. So for you, for this stage, value is finding interested people or making people more interested. Whereas in the engage stage, we want to onboard and convert them. So value is defined as higher conversions. In the retention stage, we may want to make a customer more profitable. So in that regard, we'll then aim to upsell something. So there is some sort of value that the business wants to achieve from this customer, depending on where they sit in the life cycle. And value is always subjective to any business. We then have the next layer of strategy, which is intent or outcome. This is essentially the outcome that the business wants from the interaction in order to realize some sort of business value. So I've listed a couple here. There's complete an action, inform, notify, educate, or build trust. So for example, if we take a customer sitting in the retention stage and you want to upsell something, you want to make them more profitable, the outcome that you want from the interaction is that they complete an action, they buy or make a purchase, or maybe they download or activate something. If you are sitting within the engage stage, your outcome that you want to convert them is to start building trust. Maybe you want to share more information with them. These are the different outcomes that you have from a specific interaction that will then help you realize that business value. And this is essentially what that entire strategic process looks like. We have the life cycle, which then informs what value we want from the customer, which then informs what outcome do we want from the interaction. Now, this is the strategic direction that informs how exactly we design a specific interaction. So I'm now going to move into this application stage. And the application is essentially how you execute the strategy and how you design and then deliver the perfect interaction. So to begin, it's essentially broken down into 4 moving parts, as I mentioned earlier on: the touch point, channel, timing, and tone. This is something we have spoken about in previous presentations, but now we're going to look at what exactly makes something the right touch point, channel, timing, and tone. So to start off with, we've got touch point. This is essentially the specific visible component of an interaction that the customer will directly interact with. It is just the thing that the customer sees. So for example, you've got an alert or a recommendation, a nudge, or support. So a recommendation, for example, is when you suggest a relevant product or a service or something different that the customer may not already use. A nudge is essentially a prompt that encourages the customer to take some form of action. An offer is slightly different in the sense of it provides an incentive. It can be a discount or a limited time value for something, a limited time deal. We then also have things like your service communication. So anytime you make a purchase or you buy something, you'll get a notification on your phone saying like $20 off your account at said store. If you buy something, you want a notification that says service complete or transaction successful, payment succeeded, things like that. There's also alerts, which are kind of updates as to something that's about to happen, maybe something when you're at risk of something, or if there's been a status change or any change in activity. These are all the different types of touch points that you can have. Now, the key question is, what makes the right touch point? Well, to start off with, the deliverable. It has one component, the deliverable. This is essentially the thing that you are putting in front of the customer. So this can be a product, a suggestion, a piece of information, anything that the customer is going to see and or receive. Most importantly, this deliverable has to be right for the customer in the sense that they must want it, maybe they need it, or they are going to use it. So for example, if you are going to suggest a data bundle, it has to be something that the customer actually wants or needs. If you're on contract, you don't necessarily need to buy a data bundle because you pay at the end. So customer doesn't really need that, so you don't really need to recommend it. Then associated or attached to that deliverable, we have an action. The customer has to do something with this deliverable that you are putting in front of them. So for example, you can, in most cases, if it's a thing like a data package or an airtime bundle or a loan or something, you have to buy something. But it can also be something as simple as they have to click on it. If it's an alert, they just need to click on the alert and see it. Maybe if it's a piece of information, they just need to read it. It can be a form that they need to complete. There are actions that the customer has to take to do something with this deliverable that you've just put in front of them. And then finally, with that action, there comes a cost, and it's a cost to the customer essentially. For things that you are going to buy, there's often a literal cost in the sense that a data bundle costs money. It has a price attached to it. But there are also other costs like time, attention, and effort. If you want me to read something, that requires my attention, and it costs me attention. If you want me to fill out a form, that costs my time and my effort. So there's all these different elements, the deliverable, the action, and the cost, that the business then has to balance in order to ensure that it's right for the customer. So it needs to be the right deliverable in the sense that they need to want it or need it. They then need to be willing to complete the action given the specific cost. So that is essentially what makes the perfect touch point or the right touch point for a customer. Now the question is, how do we deliver this touch point? And that is where the channel comes in. Channel is essentially where the interaction or where the touch point gets delivered through. And you have a range of different channels. You've got digital, human-assisted, social, and physical channels. Digital channels would be things like your app, your website, an SMS, or an email. Your social channels are things like social media, so TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Human-assisted channels could be call centers, so where someone can actually phone in and speak to a person. And then your physical channels can be your branches or your stores. So these are all the different ways that you can put forward an interaction or a touch point with a customer. Now, what makes something the right channel? There's 2 key components. So number 1, the reach. Does the customer actually use this channel, and have they ever interacted with the business through this channel? if you are going to put a touch point in front of them through a specific channel, you need to know that they are sitting at the end of this channel ready to receive the touch point. So for example, if you're a telco and you want to send a contract update to someone, you may consider email, but you need to ask, have we ever interacted with this person via email, or do they solely interact with us via the app? And in that regard, can we show them the contract through our app? Personally, I don't have my telco's app, so I will never be reachable through there, but I know that when they do need me, they phone me. So that's the key question, is where is this customer and where is it best to interact with them? We then also have the action cost compatibility. So this essentially asks, does this channel make completing the required action of the touch point as easy as possible? So for example, if you need to fill out the contract and it's a long form, it's not the best place to deliver that through an app. Sometimes it's easier to do that on something like a laptop. So in that regard, you might email it to someone. But if it's something as quick as making, like a purchase that you can do through the app, it isn't really a good idea to then notify someone via email. So it needs to be compatible with the action and the cost associated with the touch point. So these principles then essentially help you decide which is the right channel for the customer. We then move on to time, because timing is everything. So the right time is the moment when a customer is most receptive to the touch point, and the intended action that is associated with the touch point will be completed. And most importantly, it will be completed without any negative emotions. Even if a customer interacts with you, if they do so with negative emotions and they're annoyed that they have to do this, it's not really a two-way exchange in that regard. Even though they have completed what you want them to do, it's still negative, and in that regard, they aren't really engaged. So there is emphasis that if the customer is going to complete the intended action, they must be happy about it. Now, what determines the right time for someone? So first of all, we've got context or intent. Does the timing match or fit what the customer is currently doing or what they are trying to do? And do they have the intention to complete the action? The best example I can think of here to explain when, how to know if it's the right time to interact with the customer is digital interaction personality. We have spoken about this before, and we will continue to speak about it in upcoming presentations, but digital interaction personality essentially tells you how someone interacts or engages with their app interface. And Jace, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but certain personalities obviously interact differently. So if we look at something like the intentional interaction personality, when they are completing a task, they are very focused and intend to complete it within that space or that time frame that they've logged on to do it. So take, for example, an app, your banking app. If you log onto your phone and you want to make a payment or a transaction, they are going to complete that within that time frame. So given that digital personality, it's not necessarily a good idea to recommend a new product where you want them to buy or do something else within that window of time, because they are not going to divert from what they are currently doing. They are not going to complete the intended action of this new interaction that you're putting in front of them. So hence, it's not a good time. For an experiential digital personality, it's slightly different. They like to browse and explore their app, and in that regard, maybe recommending something while they are in that explorative stage is a good idea. We then have the recency and the frequency. This essentially helps decide if you are putting an interaction in front of a customer, you want it to be often enough that they kind of keep seeing it and they stay engaged, but you also don't want it to be too often that they get tired of it. So we often talk about novelty. I know Nicola has written a couple blogs about novelty. So it is an important aspect of customer interactions, but there is that fine balance between something new and something continued in terms of your relationship with a customer, and recency and frequency help determine how often or how regular and how irregular you should be interacting with your customer. We then have also the urgency or opportunity alignment. I feel like this one is quite self-explanatory. If you are interacting with a customer and you are delivering an offer or a limited time offer, if there is a time constraint on it, it's quite a good idea to send this interaction before this deal runs out or expires. Don't deliver the interaction after the deal has expired. That's never a good idea, but I feel like that one's fairly self-explanatory. So to kind of recap, in terms of the context and the intent of good timing, we want to see that the customer has the intention of completing the action. We then also want to know how often or how irregular are we interacting with this customer. And then is the opportunity aligned with the touch point itself in terms of timing and urgency? Now to move on to the last component, which is tone. While I was writing this, all I was thinking of is anytime, when you're a teenager and your parents go, I don't like your tone, young lady, and all you're sitting there thinking is, but there was no tone. There's always tone, so I've learned. And what exactly is tone? So you have a touch point and you've got a deliverable, an action, and a cost associated with it. You then now put it through a channel and it's going and it's traveling towards a customer. You have to wrap it up nicely so that there is this style and emotional framing and wording that resonates with the customer. There's got to be some form of emotional resonance. It needs to align with the relationship stage of where the customer sits within their relationship to the organization. And then there's also situational context. So if we look at the key principles of what makes something the right tone, I've got your emotional fit. The best way I can explain this is looking at an example of something like spend personality. If I say emotional fit, I'm not saying your customer's happy, you need to speak to them with a happy tone, or they're sad, you need to be gentle. That isn't what I'm talking about. I'm looking at things like spend personality, where we look at the different values and motivations or views that certain customers or certain spend personalities have towards different financial products. And we know that because they have these different values and views towards these products, they resonate with different wording when it comes to talking about certain products. So take, for example, Jess, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the intentional spender. It's in the name, they're intentional. They are quite deliberate and considerate when it comes to financial products, making purchases and transactions and things like that. So what works for them in terms of how you communicate with them from an emotional fit perspective is you want to display this sense of consideration and intentionality in the message. You don't necessarily want to say something like buy now or limited time offer or get it today. That doesn't resonate with that personality. It doesn't align with their values or their motivations towards a certain financial product. We then also have relationship alignment. Based on where a customer sits within a specific stage of the customer lifecycle, you'll speak to them differently. You speak to loyal customers completely different to how you would speak to customers who don't know about you or customers who are new to your business. Things like that. Also at-risk customers, so customers who have been sitting in their retention stage for a while, but now are starting to churn, you'll speak to them a little bit differently in terms of your wording and your style. We then also have contextual relevance. So does it fit the actual context of the touch point? If you are delivering, let's say, a notification about something's about to expire, or like there's a risk of something happening and you want to update the customer, you don't really want to do it in a long wordy format. You want something quick and easy that they can see that says, alert or beware of scammers, things like that. And then finally, the language and the style. It has to be consistent with your brand and how you choose to engage with your customers. But it also then obviously has to fit with what you're trying to do. So if you want to educate someone, your language and style, the wording will essentially present all the facts, and it will have that full kind of sense of cognitive load because your aim is to educate. You want to give them all the facts. Whereas again, if you're making someone simply aware of something, it's going to be shorter and more direct. So this is essentially the whole process, or everything that someone considers in delivering an interaction, starting from strategy, which included our life cycle, value, and intent, and moving right down to the actual execution or application of that strategy through the touch point, channel, timing, and tone. Now, to give an example of how this would look for one specific case, and that is a credit card activation. So a credit card activation essentially looks at a customer who may have been with a bank, let's say, for 10 years now, and they want to open up a credit card. They've been made aware of the product, so they've skipped the discovery stage. They've engaged in the sense that they've gone through the sign-up process, and now they have this card delivered and they need to use it. So they're sitting within that activation stage. That's where they are in terms of the customer life cycle. The business or the bank then want some sort of value from this unactivated customer, and that is they want them to make first use. They want them to start using their credit card. I have been through why it's valuable for a customer to start using their credit card for the bank in terms of your interchange fees, in terms of your cost of capital. If you are leaving a certain amount of money aside for that customer to use in terms of their credit limit, you want them using it so it's not just being left to the wayside, so that you can start recuperating those transaction fees and your cost of acquisition fees. That is essentially the value you want. Make first usage, but also make continued usage. For different banks, I honestly would not know, but I'm making quite a generalized assumption. There's a specific threshold of what constitutes an activated customer. You can't simply tap your card once and be considered activated. I think there's like a certain percentage of how much you must use of your credit limit to be considered activated. But anyways, the kind of general value that you want from this customer is first usage. Based on this first usage, you then have the intention for the outcome that the business wants is you want them to complete an action. You either want them to click activate button and start spending, or you just simply want them to start tapping and spending on their credit card. Now, based on this strategic direction, we know where the customer sits, we know what we want from them, and we know what we need them to do. How do we execute on that? We look at the touch point. So in this slide here, I've put in recommendation, but a recommendation would actually probably not be the best touch point if you want someone to activate their credit card, because a recommendation is a new product or a service. And if they've just gotten a credit card, you don't really want to recommend a new product or a service. You want them to use the one they've just bought or signed up for. So in that regard, you will probably interact with them through a nudge, which is that kind of subtle suggestion or subtle behavioral suggestion for them to do something, i.e. complete the action of tapping their card. But you can also interact with them through an offer or a promotion. You can say something like spend today and get 10% cash back or get loyalty points, things like that. You can incentivize the customer to complete the action. We then have the channel. For something small like an offer, you want them to see it straight away. You'll probably do this through a digital channel like an app or maybe an SMS. I know for Jess, when she got her credit card and hadn't activated it yet, her bank phoned her every single day until she did. So there's always that option. You can phone someone. Then in terms of timing, we've spoken about this. If we look at things like your digital personality, if I'm completing a task and I've logged on based on what type of digital interaction personality I am, you don't necessarily want to distract me while I'm midway through completing the task. But once I've completed the task, that's a great time to say, you have a credit card, don't forget to use it. And then tone, again, I've mentioned this, looking at spend personality. If I'm an experiential spender, it's a great idea to, communicate or deliver this offer through the app, saying something like, start living your best life today, or spend now and have a great time. But the important part is through this entire interaction, they've considered where I sit, what value, what outcome the business wants, and then they've decided, okay, we're going to do it through an offer, through this specific digital channel at this time, and we're going to tell Madison to do it in this specific way. That is the entire process for that singular customer interaction, that single green line for one single customer. And that is the full picture. But as a business, you are often not really just interacting with one person, and there are obviously different departments. So for a business, there are millions of customers and there are millions of different departments, and they're all trying to interact with different customers. So this process that I've just unpacked that applies to one singular interaction needs to occur across all the departments for every single customer, sitting at a specific stage in the life cycle with different products and different services. The business has to consider that entire approach for all those interactions. So while the ultimate goal is to reach this ongoing stage of customer interactions that are two-way, that lead to really great customer engagement, it's obviously very difficult to do that at scale for millions of people. And that is obviously what we talk about and what we do in terms of our prediction platform and our modules. I've mentioned a couple like spend personality and digital personality. And all these technological tools that we offer help perfect these interactions to drive customer engagement, most specifically at scale for the entire business. But today, the aim wasn't necessarily to talk about how you can do it or how you can use the technology to do it. That is something we have spoken about often, and we will continue to speak about it. Obviously, the aim for today was to unpack the entire process or all the moving parts that go into deciding, well, what makes the perfect interaction? How can we then execute on that? We've actually still got quite a bit of time. I'm happy to open up the floor to questions or comments or observations. If not, we will call it early for today. I think we're going to be calling it early.
All right. Ready?
Question for Maddie.
Anyone else? No, I'm joking. Yes, Jay, please.
Does this relate to the market positioning that you want to drive if you use something like an Ansoff matrix where you think about the intersection of product and market? So what happens when I want to sell to an existing product to an existing market versus selling a new product to a new market?
I'm trying to picture that matrix. It's new product, new markets. It's in the square up top. Yes.
Yeah, so that means that it's existing market, because I think what's nice about the way you kind of told your story is that we sometimes spend so much time just thinking about, selling and what's new. And in many cases, existing customers, and that's where you mentioned the sentimental equilibrium, that might be a future session, is to talk about how that is essentially calculating how frequently you need to talk to the people who've been around for a long time. And you can then, if you drive new market and new product, you're far more interested in experimentation and alternatives because you want to explore new opportunities. So you end up taking what you've learned when you showed your 4-pillar system. You take what you've learned in your retain about your existing customers and the people that do. How do you define happiness? Happiness are the people that use you continuously. Can you apply those same principles to the people who have never bought from you before? And then take that lessons into new products or new services. And that's where the recommendations then come in to drive a new kind of discovery phase. So almost in a future, it'd be nice to maybe bring the two pictures together, just to show that for a strategist or for a business leader, they can then clearly have a picture as to, like, if we have a client now who wants to take an existing client base that have not used them, they're not quite dormant, but they're not very active. How do we get them to become active? Versus somebody that used to be your customer a year ago or more, I know your number, but you haven't done anything with me, so you're, for all practical purposes, dormant. You're considered a new customer. So did you become dormant because what I sold you don't like? Or did you become dormant because you don't like my business or my brand, whatever it might be? But how do I know? Unless I set up a nudging or some experiment. So the idea is you can bring your offer recommendations, your nudges, your experiments into a single campaign.
I think that would actually make for a good topic. Bringing in, like you mentioned, that topic of sentimental equilibrium, how it fits here, and then also that matrix. So I just want to understand what you said. If you look at that retention space where you've delivered an interaction that's successful in selling more to a customer, and that was the process and the strategy that you took, you can then take that and apply it to someone who isn't a customer.
Yes, I think that the concept for us is that we always want to get a feel for what we call the sensation of difference.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way that you know truly what you are good at, if you wanted to look at your existing market, existing product, is to take the people that actively use you versus the ones who stopped using you and see what the differences are.
Okay.
So that means that if somebody does not like to be with you, you probably not going to find out. It's only when you've gone through the first 1,000 or 20% or 10% of your customer base do you figure out that, oh, hang on, they all have something in common that gives me an understanding of the people that don't like me. So that does provide an input cycle into then deciding how you configure a dynamic recommender that will then use language and nudging and other mechanisms to then pick up. So even with a spend personality, we train the spend personality on your existing customers that you do have a lot of evidence for. We then take that model, that static model, and we apply it to people who have never bought from you so that at least we can create an indicative score to have a way to speak to you, because we can use your demographic data and the like to figure out how we're going to talk to you. The moment you then start acting with us and leaving traces of evidence, that then gets used to then calculate personality.
I think that'll then be a good topic for looking at what goes into something. The question then is, how do you use the technology to deliver all of this?
Yeah.
So yeah, next topic.
Because also then, because another example could be then if you then apply loss aversion versus risk aversion.
Yes.
What would the differences be and how would a person respond? So the thing is that if you know that somebody is going to want to take an action and they feel they're going to lose out, what would the action be? What would the message be that they respond to compared to risk aversion? Means that I don't want to take this because it's going to cost too much or it's going to create too much. So you can take a number of our algorithms and apply it to a situation depending on where you sit in the pillar. Because the person that has never spoken to you, it's tough for you to make an initial assumption about what they're going to be doing. But the customer who's been with you for a long time and then stopped using you means that it was like, oh, once was your customer. But why did you change? It might not be necessarily the evidence in one, but by the time you take hundreds of thousands or millions of customers and you see these are the ones that stop using us, why, compared to the ones who are active, it gives you an understanding that you then can apply back into the cycle. And you want that done automatically with tooling. So our dynamic capabilities will do that. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I was about to say that would be that feedback loop.
Yes.
Yes, great. Next topic, feedback loops.